Hi, this is Anthony Deighton, General Manager of Data Products at Tamr, and you're listening to Experiencing Data with Brian T. O'Neill.
You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Welcome back to Experiencing Data. This is Brian T. O'Neill. Today I have Anthony Deighton on the line from Tamr, just sort of down the street from my house. We're both in the People's Republic of Cambridge. I don't know if you live in Cambridge, but I know Tamr is right down the street, basically in Harvard Square.
Right in the heart of Harvard Square, on Church Street. So super great place to be.
Yeah, that's great. So we met at the CDO IQ symposium that just happened here in Cambridge. I don't know, June or July or something. I think it was in July. And you had given a presentation in the data product topic, which is kind of the talks that I was chasing in the time I had to be there, which was not a ton, but I enjoyed that. And one of my hobbies is collecting definitions of data products for fun. And so you had a slide up about that, and I posted that on LinkedIn and generated some conversation. So I kind of wanted to dig into your perspective on this and also your work on Tamr, the product itself. So thinking about how you blend, especially now that you're using machine learning, as I understand it, in Tamr, how you're blending the traditional trio of, engineering, product, and design, and maybe now with data science as well. So that's kind of broadly the topics today. So welcome. And yeah, I'm looking forward to jumping in.
Yeah. Oh, those are all totally fascinating topics. And I think, we're at the beginning of a really big wave in data and data management. And it's an exciting time to be involved in the space. And so, and very much to your point in introduction, it's the convergence of a lot of really important themes around AI and machine learning, around how people use and consume data, how businesses manage and generate data, and those things coming together. Yeah, it's a great time. And the conference is a great conference. It's a really good collection of people that are thinking deeply about the future of data. So great conference to be at.
Speaking of deep, I actually want to ask you about shallow. So at the end of our meet and greet call, you said something like, you mentioned going in an inch deep and a mile wide after BI analytics self-service. And we didn't have time to get into that, but I just wrote that down. There was something there that I wanted to get into. And do you remember saying that? If you don't, we can just totally move on. But you were referring to something, and I wanted to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So I suspect what I was referring to in the data and analytics space, the tooling that we've delivered for analysts, business users to consume and analyze data, it's really never been better. It's really fantastic. So if you want to create bar charts and line charts, it is trivially easy to do that. In fact, I make light of it, but you can actually create forecasts, and you can do machine learning models, and you can do, sophisticated scatter plots with millions of points where it does aggregate. The level of tooling we've delivered to users for that side is tremendous. But the quality of the data that goes into those analyses, that's the shallow problem. That's the part where most organizations have not spent a lot of time and energy on it. And so it's we've over-invested in that sort of front-end experience. And I'm as much to blame as it relates to that as anyone, having worked for many years at Click, in terms of trying to transform the front-end market so that it's something that anyone and everyone can do sophisticated analysis. And we've avoided the elephant in the room, which is the quality of the data is junk. And most people don't believe this enterprise data. And we could talk about this, but I think it's not because people were self-delusional that they avoided this elephant in the room. It's that it wasn't technically possible to solve that problem. And the prior approaches, which are largely rule-based manual approaches, had failed. And that we needed a new approach. And we can talk about, what that means.
And it's worth mentioning, at the time when I invited you to come on the show, you had a different job title. So you were Chief Product Officer at Tamr, and you've moved into a new role as General Manager of Data Products. So it sounds like you're really focusing on this data product space now, correct?
That's absolutely right. And the innovation that Tamr's been pushing, it sort of reflects a little bit in the job transition, as you mentioned. So the history of Tamr, where it started, is out of academic research at MIT around how do we build AI to do what's called entity resolution. So the term of art is, how do I find common examples of data records across many different sources? And, Tamr started as an academic project called Data Tamr. And, over the last bunch of years has actually generated 16 plus patents on that core AI for doing that, again, term of art, entity resolution. What we've been doing at Tamr from a product perspective, and when I was chief product officer, or as I was chief product officer, as I started working at Tamr, is taking that core technical innovation and packaging it as a data product. So you can think of this as the Tamr platform isn't just doing AI for entity resolution. It's also doing AI for entity resolution, but layering on with that third-party data enrichment services, data quality services, and a set of user interface for people to provide feedback and curation of the data that the product is creating, and then delivering that data to consumption endpoints. And so that's a bigger solution that, again, we call a data product. And now we're shifting the business to really focusing and selling that data product. And the transition I would describe here is very similar to what we saw in the 90s in application software. In the early 90s or late 80s even, the way you built user applications is you licensed an Oracle database, 5GL programming language, a bunch of tooling, and you built an application that solves your problem. And along comes Siebel and Salesforce and PeopleSoft and a bunch of application software companies. They said, that's stupid. Like, we're all building the same application over and over again. Why don't we just build a CRM application, or as Siebel called it in the beginning, an SFA application, and we'll just deliver a packaged solution to that problem. We're seeing the same transition in the data management space. Today, largely the data management space is about delivering a bunch of tooling and leaving it to the customer to knit that tooling together to deliver value to data consumers. Our view, Tamr's view, is that we can deliver packaged application around common use cases, and we can call those data products, and we can apply product thinking to the challenge of data and data consumption. And that's really the shift.
Just to baseline the conversation, I was hoping you could either read or explain your definition of data product. I have a slide up from it. I'm curious if that slide represents your own view, but could you kind of give us when you talk about data product, what do you mean when you say that?
Sure. So the slide that we used at CDO IQ is still quite valid. Data product is a clean, curated, and continuously updated data that's consumption ready. And so there are a couple of important ideas embedded in that, I think, simple idea. Really, let's start from the end and work our way backwards. The focus of data products is on the consumption of the data and not trying to manage and govern sources. The data management space seems obsessed with this idea that we're going to sort of go and get, index all of the sources of data, or govern all of the sources of data, or try to manage all of the sources of data. And sometimes that obsession takes the form of, we want to put it all in one place. So like, we're going to put it all in God forbid, Teradata, right? Or sometimes that obsession takes the form of, we want to put rules on top of all of the sources. Or it takes the form of, we want to create a semantic definition of every single source. And all of these are a road to nowhere, because it's not humanly possible to go across hundreds or even thousands or hundreds of thousands of sources in the enterprise and try to apply this work to it, and especially if you're trying to do it manually. In contrast, the idea of the data product is to focus on a simple single table of the best information that you have across all of these sources in a consumption-ready endpoint. So it could be all of the information you have about your customers, or all of the information you have about your suppliers, or all of the information you have about your parts or your products or your patients, if you're in the healthcare space, or payers. And if you think about your business from the perspective of what data really matters to make decisions, think about that in the context of how do you consume that information, not what sources hold it. So that's this consumption idea. And then clean, curated, and continuously updated. So the idea is, how do we get the best version, the most clean, ready to go version of that data? How do we let users apply feedback and curation to that data so that they're updating values, they're providing feedback on the data, say, well, this value is wrong. And so how do we go resolve that? And how do we continuously update that? Meaning apply the concepts of agile product development, software development to the data. So whatever version of the data exists today, make sure tomorrow's versions, incrementally better and continuously update that. So a data product is a methodology and a way of thinking about your data that focuses on how you consume that data and applies this concept of agile software development to continuously clean and update it and deliver it to those consumption endpoints. Does that make sense?
Yes. The first thing that came to my mind when you talked about it, especially, is the word set. And I wonder, do you see it as this is data as a product? So we're talking about a bundle of information that's in a great curated form that's updated that I can then use to do other tasks with it. So it's the set. It feels more like data as a product, which isn't wrong or right. That's what I'm hearing. Is that correct, or is that not how you see it?
Yes. I like this, your term set. I would have probably said table.
Okay.
But the idea is the right one, which is these are the attributes, the columns, these are the records, and these are the values, the best version of those three concepts that we have, to use our language, about a specific entity, to use more business-oriented language. These are the records, attributes, and values associated with a business topic area that matters to you as a business. So to make that simpler, this is everything we know about our customers. Across all of the sources, these are the attributes we know about our customers. These are the list of customers, so these are the records. And these are the correct values for each of those customers. This is the correct phone number for this customer, the correct address for this customer, the correct company name for this customer, if it's a B2B example. And that set, to use your language, or this table, to use my language, is the output. That is the result of product thinking associated with generating that set. And so the mechanism here is applying what we would think of as very, very logical software development techniques, but applied to data. And so this means, continuously updating it, not trying to do it in one big go and then never touching it again, getting feedback from users. So, you don't build a software product and then not ask your users whether they like it. No, users provide lots of feedback and you update it. So apply product thinking to that. And then to relate it to Tamr for a second, if you have this concept of a data product and you want to build it and deliver it to your data consumers, what system do you have for managing that process? So if we're building software, we have a system. We call it, Jira and Confluence and Atlassian, the whole set of software. And by the way, it's not the only one. There are other examples. But the point is, there's a system for managing that process. You also have a compiler and a IDE, and you have a whole set of tooling for building software. What's the equivalent for data? And in many cases, it doesn't exist. And so really the idea behind Tamr at its core is, how do we provide a framework for delivering these consumption-ready data sets, continuously cleansed and ready to go? And that's really what we're focused on.
There was actually, we had a thread about Tamr this morning in the data product leadership community, which just launched last week. And I was asking them, I was saying, hey, I'm having Anthony come on the show. And is Tamr a data product? This is just something I threw out itself. They're purporting to provide data products as the result of what they do, but is Tamr itself one? And then this spawned a whole discussion, because we're talking a lot about, does the DPLC even have its own shared definition of what a data product is? And most of the people who are in there have some connection to my framing and definition of what that is. But one of the open debates is whether or not analytics or decision support of some kind is a fundamental thing that must be present in order for something to be a data product. So I would say, in your case, it sounds like analytics or decision support is not necessarily something that needs to be there for it to be a data product in your definition. Is that accurate?
Sort of. I don't think that Tamr needs to provide the analytics front end. But I do think the analytics front end needs to be available. And what I mean by that is, if I simply deliver the data to you and say, well, knock yourself out, that's not going to solve your decisioning problem. You need a mechanism of analyzing that data. The good news is that software is readily available. There's a wide range of different choices, and many organizations make multiple choices. They use Excel, they use Google Sheets, they use Click, they use Power BI, they use ThoughtSpot, they may have a machine learning platform they're using. And there's a myriad, in many cases, they're using multiple of these, and that's great. And the world doesn't need more of those. There are plenty of really capable sets of tooling out there for that.
Sure. No debate on that. It's more whether or not when you talk about data products and your worldview, are we assuming that inherently there must be a decision support capability built into it? And it sounds like it's not. Like that's a downstream thing that someone may enable, but it's not a requirement to kind of fit. Some of this doesn't matter that much. It's more of a curiosity for me because there's a lot of different definitions out there. And I find when different people talk about it, they're picturing different things in their head, different facets. You have the data mesh world, which has very specific test criteria, mostly about the asset to me, about the thing itself, the output. You talked about applying product thinking, which is very much in line with what I call, my definition I refer to as the producty one, because it's actually more about the verb and not the noun. It's more about the act of applying design and product thinking to something to make it valuable enough someone would pay for it, which most of the definitions don't talk about that. And I'm like, it's not really a product if someone won't exchange something of value. I'll switch from my old way of doing it because it's so good for me, or I'll pay for it. And that's just we're here to talk about your version. So that's kind of where we were digging in, and we had a nice long thread about this. And, so I was curious whether you thought Tamr itself is a data product. And it sounds like it probably wouldn't be, is my guess. But I don't know, unpack that for a minute.
Yeah. So a couple of important ideas. First of all, is Tamr a data product? So Tamr is a company, and it produces a SaaS application that itself is a platform for delivering data products, but we sell the data product. We don't sell the platform. And just to draw an analogy, Salesforce is a company that delivers a product called Salesforce. A
whole bunch of them.
Yeah. Let's just start with a simple one, which is Salesforce.
75 products. Called.
Right, exactly. In the olden days, back right. When it started. And it's built on a platform that Salesforce built and they eventually started selling the platform called S-Force or Force or whatever it was. But the important point is that they didn't sell the platform. They sold the application. But they also needed to build a platform for building and delivering that platform. And that analogy works perfectly for Tamr. We're a software company. We've obviously built a SaaS platform. We use that SaaS platform to build data products. We sell the data products. We don't sell the platform. Whether we do that eventually, that's a whole different question. But in the near term, that's what we're doing. By the way, the second point you make there, which I think is arguably even more important, is the idea that data products have value, and that value is you should pay for them. And we could argue, or I think you might agree, that they are actually more valuable than the platform, in the sense that they're more closely connected to the business value, the decision value that you're going to get out of that data. And again, I go back to this thing I started with, which is the data management space is unique in the enterprise software space in that this community seems to think that what customers want is many, many, many different point tools that they need to knit together to produce a solution. And in each of those tools themselves is not that valuable. It's it's a very pointed piece of pointed capability that they're not willing to pay a lot for. And the real cost comes from trying to knit them together into something that works. And that to me is a massive opportunity to do that knitting on behalf of people who care really about the data and making better decisions and delivering that as a product. And by the way, again, to go back to my 1980s, 1990s analogy, we've seen this movie before, right? This is not the first time that we've seen a software space evolve from a set of disparate tools, which we expected customers to knit together, into a packaged application that solves a problem.
I totally hear you on the tool stuff. And frankly, I think it keeps a lot of people employed having all these tools to knit together. And look at all the work we're doing over here. Look at all the stuff we've done. And it's like, but all of that so far is a cost. Like what I see is like, yes, you've done a lot of work, but that's just cost so far. There's no benefit. And so I think the product orientation helps us think about, we have to deliver benefits and outcomes, and the output is tied to that, but the output is only good if there's a benefit that gets derived from it.
And the surest fire way of figuring out if there's a benefit is, are you willing to pay for it?
Exactly.
And that's where that creates that linkage back to where you started. And this idea of confusing working hard with delivering value is something that we see all over the place. I used to make this joke that business travel is extreme. It's a lot of work. Getting to the airport, figuring out how to get through security, get on the plane. Like, there's a lot of work. In many cases, not that valuable. And so people who confuse travel, business travel, with work often fall into a very similar trap, as we see with data management for professionals that spend a lot of time knitting together tools and never actually delivering value to the user who needs to use that data to make decisions. So a huge amount of work, to your point, not a lot of value.
Also qualify, to me, it's not just about paying for it. I think paying for it can also be exchanging value, where the exchange may be, I'm willing to give up the old way I do stuff. Sure. Because change management is such a challenge for analytics and data science teams when they try to get the business to trust a model or trust a new dashboard or to use it. They may not write a check to you, but if you can get that marketing person to stop doing it the old way and to start doing it the new way, that is an exchange of value. They gave something up to use your version because the benefit was higher. That, or swiping the credit card, or as it may be, if you're a commercial software company or whatever, like in your case, either one of those to me kind of fits the spirit of this product-y approach to it. So
yeah, couldn't agree more.
Let's talk about this there's such a chain of users and makers involved with this stuff, right? Like in your case, it's like, I don't know, maybe there's a data engineering team gets its hands on the Tamr stuff first, and then it gets packaged up into something the data scientists could use to build a model, which goes to the application engineers, which goes to the front end designer, which finally goes into the hands of some user. So there's this whole chain of people there. And I'm curious, kind of like, how does that influence how you decide to package up we'll call them tables in your case, but like, let's take customer data. Mm-hmm. For example, propensity to churn. Well, that was an analytic that I assume Tamr could probably come up with some way to do that with all the data you have and put a column called propensity to churn in the master data set. But that's actually an analytic about the customer data. So when you ship and sell your customer data table to the data engineering team, and then it goes down the pipeline or whoever, how did you decide whether or not to include a calculated value such as that, as opposed to last name, which is not a calculated value? You put propensity to churn in there, and I'm just making that one up. But you get the point. How did you know whose need will I satisfy? That downstream business user, the designer, the front-end developer, what the data scientists need, what the analysts need, what the engineer needed? No, disambiguate, keep everything raw, because we might want to do something on our own, and we don't want your version of propensity to churn. We want to build our own. So just give us all the raw customer data. I'm sure you've had this discussion before. How did you decide like what goes in and what doesn't?
It's a great question. And in a way, I have a very specific and simple solution or answer to the question, which is Tamr wouldn't produce a calculated value like propensity to churn. There's a challenge associated with calculating that metric, building a model, figuring out, back testing the model, all kinds of really interesting problems that, again, there's great tooling for solving. The biggest problem in calculating that metric is getting high quality, clean data into that model so that it produces high quality output, or the inverse is often said, garbage in, garbage out. Meaning the problem in many organizations isn't calculating a propensity to churn metric. They have great people to figure that out, or you can even buy software for doing it or whatever. The problem is their data is organized by business unit or organized by geography. It's junky, like it's missing value. So you got to calculate the propensity to churn metric, and you're missing an important dimension of that customer, or you have 5 copies of the customer. And so you calculate it incorrectly because you're only looking at 1/5 of the customer information, or you're missing an entire. You're looking at propensity to churn, but you're only looking at the U.S. data. You're not gathering data from Europe because, well, that's over in a different database, right? So the problem is not the calculation of the metric. The problem is that the quality of this data coming in is poor. And I think this challenge is getting even more acute as more organizations use data for making better decisions. And, if you think about something like what we see with large language models, the biggest challenge in generating these models is getting high quality, clean data to train it on. So no, we're not focused on building a propensity to churn metric as part of the data product. We're solving what we think is the root challenge there, which is, in the example, clean, curated, continuously updated customer information so that when you calculate that propensity to churn metric, it's actually correct and that you're actually getting an accurate measure of that customer's propensity to churn in your example, and then making the best decision coming off of that. Oh, this customer is likely to churn. I'm going to go take this next best action. So again, we're very clear on this point. We're not calculating that metric. There's great tooling for doing that. We're making sure that that tooling has access to the best information so that when you calculate that metric, it's actually correct.
So I guess the spirit of my question wasn't so much about that particular calculation. It was more, I guess, when we talk about customer data, I can see a business user having a logical view of what customer data is that does not map to database tables, literally, right?
Exactly.
How many products lifetime have they ever bought? That's a calculated value probably, but for them, it's like last name, first name, city, number of products bought, lifetime value. They seem like logical customer attributes. And so how do you decide whether or not is your kind of line like, if it involves joining a table, we don't do it because we only talk to at the lowest level, we talk to the tables and we clean the data and then provide a clean version of that. And we don't ever join or do anything because there's different needs along that chain of human beings involved. And that was kind of my curious as a product person, how do you, whose need do you want to satisfy? Is it the first line, which is the DBA or the analyst? I don't know all the technical side so much, but there's the first person that interfaces with Tamr is probably a fairly technical person in the plumbing department at the enterprise. Do you keep it at that level? Is that kind of your...
Yeah, maybe a way to think about this is, are you looking at an aggregate or a calculation, or are you looking at the underlying data that would power that calculation? So our view is where Tamr ends is the view of that data that can then power some calculation or aggregate thereafter. I want to be a little careful and say having multiple input to tables is a key piece of that requirement. I mentioned this at the CDO IQ Summit, this idea of Deighton's law, this idea that the way data is organized reflects the organization structure of the organization that created it. So if you've organized your business by geography, then you typically have data in tables that are organized by geography. Or if you organize your business by product line, you typically have your data in tables that are organized by product line. And often it's some combination of multiple dimensions. The important idea here is bringing data together from multiple sources is a key requirement in producing this clean, curated, continuously updated view of that data that can then power these aggregates or calculations like, how many products did I buy? And also probably worth noting that there are two concepts of a join. One is joining source tables, okay? And the second is joining across entities or looking across key business topic areas that matter. And you mentioned one, which is what products has this customer bought? Or an aggregate would be how many did they buy? But first order question is what were they? Those are really important to us. So we want to think about creating key relationships between these entities. And that's a key requirement of data products. We have this concept in the product of a Tamr ID, which is to say an ID field that creates that linkage between those entities. Many of our customers refer to their customers by their Tamr ID. So that becomes a kind of language internally inside the organization. Say, this is the ID for that customer. That ID was generated by Tamr. And importantly, it's different than, or it's not the same as the key relationships in the source tables. There's a relationship there. We can say this Tamr ID is composed of these source table IDs, but it itself is independent. And that's extremely valuable. And then creating relationships across those entities, so between product and customer, between product and part, or between part and subassembly, or between manufacturing plant and product. Like, you can think of many of these relationships, and you could even represent them as a graph and then show the data structure of the organization. Those are really important ideas, but they're not done at the source table level. And that's really one of the key differences of the way we think about it, and what makes it a data product and not trying to manage source data, which is a road to nowhere.
How do you think about the design of a product like Tamr, and where does the experience of Tamr end? Because you're not an endpoint, right? You're actually kind of the beginning of something, but you have to end your product at some point.
Sure.
So there's an experience that happens. It's got a bridge to another experience. I'm just curious, how did you go? Do you have designers on staff? Do your product managers do this work? How do they, especially for technical tooling? I'm just kind of curious. Who does the work? How do they do it? How do you see that work happening?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's in a way an even more challenging question, because we're building and designing something new. So there's no sort of prototype to build from, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, yes, we have product managers. Yes, we use a lot of design resources as part of this process. And ultimately, the source of the inspiration needs to be the customer, and looking at how they're using these data products. But this raises, I think, one of the really important product questions and challenges, which is, it's really important to obviously to talk to customers, to listen to the challenges they have. But customers are generally not good designers. So if you ask them to solve the problem, they will produce a solution in the context of what they know and understand, typically of how things have worked in the past.
Right.
The really hard work of software engineering in general, and product management and design, is to understand the underlying or latent need of the customer, and then design a solution that's better than they imagined. I'm sure you've heard, people have always, I've heard that Henry Ford didn't even say this, but anyway, this adage that is attributed to Henry Ford, which is probably not actually something he said, which is that if I asked my customers what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. The core truth there, whether he said it or not, is an important one, which is, again, customers are actually typically not good product designers. They typically think of solutions in the context of the current solution. And great innovation comes when you solve a problem in an unexpectedly efficient or effective way. And that's hard. And that requires testing and prototyping and listening deeply, asking 5 whys. There's a lot of techniques for how do you get there. Shameless plug for a second. One of the best people I've ever worked with in regard to this is a gentleman named Donald Farmer that I worked with at Click, and he just wrote a book called On Innovating. You can, if you Google or go to Amazon and look up Donald Farmer Innovation, he has a great book that gets into very practical techniques for doing this work. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, you're speaking my language here, so I'm glad, because I get tired of saying it. It's nice when someone else says some of those some of these things. One of the books I read recently that I really like, and I do some advising for MIT Sandbox Venture Fund, and I often recommend this to the young startup founders there, the MOM test. And one of the foundational concepts in the MOM test is this idea that the customer owns the problem. You own the solution, but you're not there to talk about the solution. And that's kind of the boundary. You also don't get to tell them what problem they should care about. They have their problem, it's urgent, and it's maybe worth paying for. And you need to really lock into that and put aside. And I think data people maybe struggle with this sometimes, because they can see how this could be so powerful for you. But yeah, I don't care. I just want X, but there's a better way to do it. But that's a problem that they don't feel right now. And so a product person has to be aware of the feelings here and the desirability aspect and all of that. So I really like this idea of the dividing line of they own the problem, you own the solution. The customers are not designers. I would say I think co-design can be valuable as long as if you're doing co-design with a customer, you look at their solutions that they give you as really a way of figuring out what the problem is. And you can design to figure out what the problem is. And sometimes we do prototyping and we do a little bit of work just to keep the conversation going, to say, no, that I don't care about that. Oh, okay, good. So we just learned something here. We're designing to learn, but not like we're never going to throw that away. We're just going to keep going with whatever direction we set. So there's different kinds of design there. And anyhow, so I like that how you frame this, and it very much, clicks with how I think modern product is done.
No, I think that's a really important idea. And I think this is often done very badly, unfortunately. So I think you end up seeing a lot of product companies that sort of, I don't know, say give up, but they sort of like, well, we'll just let the customer build the solution. And then, and in fairness, like as a consultancy, like if your job is to deliver, if you're a contract development organization, it's not there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not innovation. And so that's really about understanding in a deep way the pain or latent requirements of the customer. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, so you mentioned a little bit about your design and product development process there. Is there anything different about this when you add machine learning or a data science component to this? Like the traditional, modern software, we think about the trilogy of product, user experience, and engineering or some tech lead coming together. And it's like they all pull on each other a little bit, but somewhere in there is how we arrive at good products, because each of the triangle is looking at different components of the product. Is data science just an extension of engineering in the technical part? Or is it like a fourth leg of this stool that used to be a three-legged stool, now it's four legs? Talk to me at all. I don't know. How do is data science like a significant new leg to the stool at Tamr, or in your perspective with data products?
Yeah, maybe controversially, I don't think of it as a new leg to the stool. I think it's just another tool in the toolkit.
Okay.
And arguably the newest tool, arguably the shiniest, the coolest, the whatever, like there's some, but it is not different in that context. If you think about early database design, nobody bought a database because it had a planner, a particularly efficient query planner. The value they would get, the queries ran faster. Yes, got it. Like I'm going to buy. And maybe I'll say this in a even snarkier way. The world is full of software companies that get excited about their own technology and attempt to sell that technology. And there are even buyers, like especially early adopters, and I would count myself among them, that love technology for technology's sake. It is not a great way to build and scale a business, because most, the vast majority of buyers could care less about the quality of your machine learning or AI. What they want is the outcome. And so focusing energy on describing the outcome is a much better use of energy and time than attempting to get into the minutiae and explanation as to what the underlying tech is. And machine learning and AI is no different in that regard. So that's why it's not another leg.
But they also don't talk about the engineering, or, wow, the product management that went into Tamr is so amazing. Nobody says that, right? So I guess my question was specifically more about how you make the sausage. So I was thinking, inside the company, the way you go about designing Tamr as a enterprise software product, that's more what my question was whether or not the data science component now, because I know that you guys are leveraging some of that with your entity resolution, is that a significant new skill set that it needs to be part of this inner ring of product stakeholder, this product team, or not? It's really a subspecialty of the engineering area. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's a new and shiny tool in the toolkit, and arguably requires different skills and different engineering talent and these sorts of things. But do customers buy because we have world-class product management and design and machine learning and AI? Yeah, no, they buy because the product solves the problem they have. Now, look, I will also say great software companies are very customer responsive, and they're good at engaging the customer, and they take feedback well, and they integrate it quickly into the body. The pace with which we innovate, these are important metrics and measures of whether these processes are efficient and effective. You can very easily go down a wrong road and build bad innovations. And if you ignore your customers, you're probably not going to understand their problems. Like there's lots of ways to screw this up. And so in that sense, yes, customers do buy because we do these things well, but they're not coming in and evaluating the skill sets inside the organization and then buying the wrong product just because they like, the product management organization. They're buying because they like the outcome.
Correct. And so maybe I'm not articulating my question enough. I actually wanted to peel back the onion, not for a customer standpoint about benefits, but just rather, how do you make product at Tamr, your process and method? And that's a big, giant conversation that's probably too big to get into right now, but it was more whether or not the discipline of data science in a tool that's leveraging that in a heavy way needs to be part of that core. And I'm making an assumption that you product engineering and user experience design are kind of your core trilogy and how you work. I'm just making that assumption that that's how you work. And is there a fourth leg of that stool? Forgetting what customers think about it, really just looking inside the sausage casing here.
No, I don't think that I don't think there's some new set of skills there. The work we do around, machine learning and AI is fairly classic software engineering skills and fits cleanly into this idea of product management design and design thinking. It's a strong point of differentiation in terms of the outcome, but in terms of the process, there's nothing unique there.
Not changing the process a lot is what I'm hearing. Okay, yeah, cool. Understood. I know we're getting close to time here, but I'm curious about your conversations with data product managers in the customer space. Now, thinking back into your phone calls and your work on the road or whatever, are you interfacing with DPMs a lot? Are you seeing more of them? What are their challenges like? That sort of thing. Part of the reason I formed the DPLC, the community, is because it's a place for these people to get together and realize, hey, there are other people like me out there. We're not this rare breed that it is fairly rare, but I'm just kind of curious what you're hearing in this space. Do you kind of feel like you're in the company of product people when you meet DPMs, or do you feel like, no, I'm in the company of data people who are trying to apply product stuff to their data science and analytics work? Just curious about your thoughts about the DPMs that you might meet out in the wild in the customer space.
Yeah, I think it's closer to data people trying to apply product thinking today. But that's not a criticism. I think we're on a journey.
Evolution. Yeah.
An evolution. And we are, if this is 100-year journey, we're on day one, meaning it is early days. So it is not a surprise to me that the community is not huge. It is not a surprise to me that it is not well optimized and, all the kinks are worked out. It is not a surprise to me that even the tooling isn't well figured out. This is very consistent with what you see early in the evolution of a new category of work and eventually, hopefully, software and how organizations are going to change the way they work with data. And I mean, personally, I think this is a good thing. It's exciting. It's a good time to be building a community as you are and engaging that community and in a way, self-organizing a solution to these problems and thinking about how to work differently. So it's all a good thing, but we should not be delusional to believe that it's all figured out. And, if you join the community, like there's a playbook and we're just going to hand you the playbook, you read the playbook and you're off to that. No, but that's, I think, what makes it fun, because it's like, yes, we get to go build this together.
Yeah. No, you're right on there. Last question, and then I want to kind of give you the final word if you have anything that you'd like to say to the audience. But any lessons learned, like if you started over as CPO at Tamr today, is there something you would change, or is there something you wish, Anthony from 5 years ago knows now or knew back then that now? Just in your role as a product person in the data space?
That's a tough question. At some level, product people, and I would include myself in that regard, are relentlessly self-critical. And I always make this joke, I'm a much better investor backwards in retrospect. But I think it's true of product management and product design as well. Like solutions to problems are obvious in retrospect. They're just way harder to look at going forward. And so it's really easy to look back on any product experience at any company or internally at any work you've done and think to yourself, well, geez, if I knew what I know today, it would just happen a lot faster, better, cheaper, all the rest of it.
Sure.
So I'm always wary of that mode of thinking. That said, I think the thing I would anchor on, and I think in the technology and software space, it's so easy to anchor on the technology, the code and the whatever. It's much better. It's always more successful when you anchor on the customer and the pain associated with that customer. Where do customers complain and get frustrated, and teasing out the root why of that pain. This technique of 5 whys, of sort of asking why over and over again, which 3-year-olds are so good at, and for some reason we lose that skill as we get older. I think that's something if I look backwards, more of that and less around the actual tech is always a good anchoring point. So that's probably my one piece.
Awesome. Any closing thoughts you want to give, and how can people stay in touch with you as well if they want to reach out?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Easiest way to keep in touch is via LinkedIn. And obviously I'm reasonably easy to figure out my email address at tamr.com. And my parting thought, and maybe as a way to capstone all of our conversation, is I think it's an exciting time to be a part of the data products space, whether as a customer and user of data products, as a way of applying that thinking internally for how your organization manages and uses data, or as a software company, as Tamr is, and thinking about how we build and manage a platform for delivering these data products to users and customers. This is the beginning of what I think is a pretty big shift in the way the data management space works. And I think that's an extremely exciting thing to be a part of. And I'm glad for you to be building community around it and gathering people to think and talk about it. But, this is if I were early in my career in the data space, this is the place to be. And driving and pushing and innovating in this space is going to produce a lot of really valuable outcomes for people. And that's going to be, that's an exciting thing to be a part of.
Cool. Thanks. I appreciate the closing words. Anthony Deighton, newly minted general manager of data products at Tamr. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been great to have you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.